Someone just told me that when you look at history, there are the facts and there are the story that you remember. And I've heard the story of Good Friday like 100 times, and I know the facts as they're presented in the Bible. But what I'd like to do tonight is to tell you the story of Good Friday the way that I remember it, the way that I envision it, and what it means to me. And so for me, in my head, Good Friday actually starts on Thursday, the night that Jesus was betrayed. Jesus and his disciples had just finished what is referred to as the Last Supper. It's night now. And Jesus leads them as they walk their way out of the city and through a valley until they come to a path. And this path will lead them to a grove of olive trees. And just beyond those trees, you'll find a garden. It's called the Garden of Gethsemane. I imagine that garden. I've never been there, but I imagine it to be a beautiful place. Located at the foot of the Mount of Olives. It was secluded, and this would be the last place that Jesus and the disciples would be together before his death. It has incredible meaning. This would be the place where Jesus would have to face down his demons. When they enter the garden, Jesus knows exactly what he has to do. I mean, before the night is through, he has to find the strength and the courage to finish what has been started since the beginning of time. He knows what's coming. He knows what he has to endure. The loneliness begins to overtake him as he leaves his friends behind and say, "Please stay here as I can go deeper into the garden where I can be alone and pray." Never has he felt so weak, so scared. Jesus now cries out to his Father to come to him in this time of fear, in this moment of desperation, to hold his hand, to see his face. I don't know, just to know that he is there in this darkest moment of his life. And perhaps Jesus catches a glimpse of himself looking into his own eyes as he hangs there on the cross in the future. Whatever it was in this moment, Jesus looks into the face of death and he trembles. He begs the God of the universe, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup be taken from me." In other words, if there's any other way to accomplish your plan, please let me know now, because I don't want to go through this. In his moment of humanness, he does not want to die. At least not like this. And so he says, "My soul is so overwhelmed with sorrow, even to the point of death." He stops and again he prays the exact same thing. "Father, if there is any other way." And then it says, "Now being in serious anguish, Jesus prayed even more earnestly, to the point that his sweat became like drops of blood that fell to the ground." His pain and his agony and the strain of it all had become unbearable until this moment. I love this verse. An angel from heaven appeared to him in this moment that he needed him most, and gave him the strength that he needed to get up and to begin his journey to the cross. It's like the Father just reaches down from the heavens and he takes his Son's hand and says, "I'm here. I'm right here. It's going to be okay." In the darkest moments of our lives, when we cry out to him, he shows up as if to say, I'm right here. It's going to be okay. You see, this was a defining moment where Jesus was weak enough in his humanity that at the snap of his fingers, he could have abandoned and walked from the whole thing. But he didn't. Something made him stay. Something made him get up slowly as he hears the soldiers approach. Something made him turn around and allow Judas to play out his role, and with that kiss, he gave up his freedom as he was taken into custody. What could have possibly made him stay there and decide to actually go through with that, knowing what he was going to have to face? Could it have been you? We don't know. But Jesus may have very well looked into the future and saw you, me, lost, facing an even more horrific death than what he would have to endure, because it would be one that would last for all of eternity. And so he bears down. He clenches the ground. He decides to do what he has to do in the middle of the garden, praying for strength. And right then, right there, Jesus makes a decision. He decides this. He would rather go through hell for you than to live in heaven without you. So now I catch up in my head, and now it's Friday, betrayed by Judas on Thursday, arrested, and now on Good Friday he stands there in front of Pilate, the Roman governor, waiting to be sentenced. It was the Romans' favorite method for dealing with criminals and troublemakers. They just have a reputation of just being ruthless, and there were plenty of easier ways to kill people, but crucifixion had its advantages. The primary one being that it was such a gruesome death that it caught the attention of everyone around in a way that something as a mundane like giving death, quick death, could never do. And so in sending a strong message, they're like, hey, don't mess with the Romans or you could end up like that guy. As Jesus awaits his sentence, the crowd yells one last time, "Crucify him. Crucify him." Compelling Pilate to wash his hands as he sentences him to death and seals his fate. He gives in to the will of the people. It will be death by cross. And it will be brutal. Jesus' life in this moment now is out of his hands. It's out of his control. He is now turned over to the soldiers who can do whatever they want. And they begin to whip him, and they beat him within an inch of his life, and they mock him, and they spit on him. And finally, they take these branches from a thorn bush and they weave together this crown, the crown of thorns that has become so famous. As they jam these thorns into the sacred head of Jesus, they yell out, "Here he is. Here's your king." And when they came to the place called the Skull, there the soldiers crucified him. But Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." So finally they reached the destination at the top of this hill called Golgotha, or the place of the skull, because there's been so many crucifixions there. And the soldiers do what they do. They take these old, rusty iron metal spikes that were probably used 100 times, 5 to 7 inches long. And they drive them into the hands and feet of Jesus to attach him to the cross. They drove the nails in just in the right spots. These guys were professionals, and they did not want to kill him. At least not yet. They wanted him to be able to have enough life to hang there on that cross for as long as they could keep him alive. They wanted to enjoy watching him suffer, to die a slow death. And with that, he was pushed to the very edge of human endurance. See, it wasn't so much the pain of being nailed to the cross as, and I don't want to minimize the pain of that, but it was much more the difficulty that he had in breathing. The cross is so deadly, not because you bleed out, but because you slowly suffocate. Every breath is a chore because Jesus would have to find the strength to wrap his fingers around the nails that are in the middle of his hands, to push himself up and leverage in the one nail that is on his feet to push up for every breath that he takes. And life is beginning to slowly leave his body. I just don't get how in the middle of all that, in the middle of all of his suffering, that Jesus is still Jesus. And he just yells out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It's obvious that none of them really know what's going on. I get that, but it's like they get a free pass for their role in the beating and the nailing and the mocking. And it's crazy to me that Jesus doesn't hold anything against them. He just shows them compassion to the bitter end as he just says, "Father, forgive them." Two other men, both were criminals. They were also led out with Jesus to be executed, one on his right, the other on his left. But the people stood watching, and even the rulers sneered at him. And they said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he's God's Messiah, the chosen one." And one of the criminals who hung there, he joined in and he hurled insults at him while he's hanging on the cross. "Aren't you the Christ? Well, then save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him and said, Don't you fear God? You're under the same sentence. We're punished justly for we're getting what our deeds deserve, but this man's done nothing wrong. And then he turns to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today, you will be with me in paradise." So, this story is, I think, the most meaningful part of Good Friday, because not just a few feet away from Jesus are these two criminals, one on the right, one on the left. They probably have heard about Jesus, but have never seen him before, I'm guessing. And what are the odds that these two men meet Jesus in this moment of death? I mean, don't take this for granted. Out in front of them is eternity. Death's door is wide open. They are about to walk right through it. They are moments away from death. And so you have this one criminal who, even under these horrific circumstances, one of these criminals, in his arrogance, has such an ego that he hurls insults and mocks Jesus to the very end, hanging just a few feet from the only one who could save him. He goes out into eternity without God. When all he had to do is just look over and to give in to his grace, the grace of Jesus. But his pride kept him from being with God in that moment, and because of that, his pride kept him from being with God for the rest of eternity. How many of us fall into that bucket and don't even know it? And then by direct contrast, at the very last minute, from a guy who I swear had a really messed up life to end up here, he somehow figures it out. And who knows exactly what happened in the heart of this guy, but somehow, just in the nick of time, he comes to realize the truth about himself. And in a humble way, he understands the truth about Jesus. And it was on that day, on that Good Friday, the very first one, that a common criminal was the first to receive the forgiveness of the cross. And it was on that day that a common criminal found himself in a place called paradise. God's grace is just so unfair, isn't it? That this man should live such a bad life and come to the end of his life and yet be saved, and yet I've lived my whole life trying to be a good person and I end up getting the same? How's that fair? According to the Bible, there are just two categories of people in the world, and it's not those who are good and those who are bad. It's those who get it and those who don't. Those who receive the grace of Jesus because they are humble enough to acknowledge their sin and depravity and messed up life, and they throw themselves on the grace of Jesus, and there are those who reject it. I got to tell you, I want to be the one who gets it. I never want to be so arrogant and so egotistical that I mock God to all my friends at a party, or to be embarrassed that I am a Christian, to be embarrassed to say that I'm going to church, to acknowledge before God, and everybody else for that matter, to live a life of authenticity and to say, I really am a sinner and I am in desperate need of Jesus. Because I have to tell you that the only thing that I want to hear on that day, on that last day that I spend on this earth is this. Hey, Darren, surely today you will be with me in paradise. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until it was 3 p.m. And at 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Something happened in this moment that I don't think we fully get. Suddenly, everything goes dark. The sun disappears, and just like that, the thick darkness settled over the land. It was like the darkness of a cave where you can't see your hand in front of you. In the middle of the night, this thick, ugly darkness that'll make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. All eyes are now on the center cross. Something had happened to Jesus during those 3 hours, and exactly what is really hard to say. But it was something terrible during those hours of darkness. Some awful burden had descended upon him and sucked out what little life was left in him. For 3 hours, nothing, and then all of a sudden, something happens, and it breaks the silence and causes Jesus to cry out. when it uses that phrase that Jesus cries out, it's a Greek word that's used only here in the New Testament, and it can be translated as literally like a scream. Some refer to it as the scream of the damned, because at this moment, it was this moment when the sins of the entire world were placed squarely on the shoulders of Jesus. And he felt the sin of the entire world as he screams out. And never before has he felt the separation that sin causes between us and God. And he doesn't even know what that is. And so he cries out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Where'd you go? I've asked myself that once or twice in the middle of some crisis, or those days when I lost the people I love the most in this world, as I held their hand, the darkest night of my soul. Where'd you go? Where is God? You ever ask yourself that in those dark moments of your life? I always ask this because I think it applies to me, but when I ask the question, are you sure that it's God who has abandoned you? Or is it you that has abandoned God? My God, why have you forsaken me? Or is it I who have forsaken you? In that moment, when the whole world goes dark, the question will not be why. The question will be who. In that moment, who will you cling to in the darkness? Will you pray this with me? Oh God, please forgive me when I forsake you, when I turn my back on you, when I act like I don't even know you. Oh God, may I never be separated from you, even when I don't deserve your grace. And so as the life of Jesus is coming to an end, he cries out, "It is finished." The pain is now unbearable. Breathing is almost impossible. The crowd gathers round like vultures circling their prey. The friends of Jesus watch in horror as his life ebbs away. Death rattles in his throat. From somewhere down below, you can hear the fiendish, evil howling of the demonic forces who believe they have won. The angels look away. They can't bear to watch anymore. But just to make it clear what's happening here, Jesus is actually setting the record straight. You see, it is finished doesn't mean he's finished. It doesn't even mean his life is finished. In English, it is finished is 3 words, but in the Greek language that the Bible is written in, it's just one. Tetelestai, which means the debt has been paid. The contract has been fulfilled. The work has been completed. The word tetelestai has historically been a happy word. It's a celebration. You paid off your house. You fulfilled your duty. The debt has been paid and the contract fulfilled, and you're now free from this burden. But Good Friday had no such joy. The human race incurred a debt of sin that we were unable to pay. We incurred a debt of sin that we could never hope to repay. And I'm telling you, the story could have ended completely different. If God's grace were fair, we would all die. But thank God, his grace ain't fair. Thank God he cries out tetelestai. Because when Jesus says, "It is finished, it was our debt that was paid off, so that we could now live in the light and the love and the grace and the freedom of God. It was now about noon. Darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And when he had said this, he breathed his last. The Roman guards, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was the Son of God." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they went away in complete sadness. Jesus' final cry for the end is one of relief. For the last 15 hours of his life, Jesus has been in the hands of men who have sought to do evil to him, to beat him, to tear the skin off his back with their whips, to mock him, to spit upon him. And they have finally done all that they can do. And Jesus begins to see the light emerge, the light of being reunited with the Father. And as his life slowly slips away, all of a sudden, it's like the people around him begin to get it. They finally begin to understand that this man was different. They suddenly figure out who he is. And out of nowhere, this one Roman soldier says out loud, "Surely this was the Son of God." Will you all pray this prayer with me? I believe that I am saved by the unconditional grace of God. There's nothing I can do to make God love me anymore. There's nothing I can do to make God love me any less. And because of that, I come before you, Jesus, just as I am and not as I should be. I come to you with all my past, all my baggage, all my sin, and lay it at your feet. Jesus, I ask that you take it from me and free me from all that holds me back from giving myself fully to you. I ask that you fill me with compassion, humility, and patience. Give me the strength to forgive myself and others as you have forgiven me. Give me the determination to keep my heart set on you and not on earthly things and the problems of this world. I come before you right now, Jesus, and I give you my life, not in part, but the whole. I ask that you'll give me the strength to rise up and walk firmly in my faith until the very end. Amen.